everybody, welcome to today's Mills Team webinar. We're just going to go around the table again quickly. So I'm Katie, Sue, Mike, Christine, Lauren, and Sarah, and I will get to our very special guest in just a second. We are so thrilled today to be talking to you about something that's very near and dear to our hearts. Being in the real estate industry and working with people in their homes, a really important part of that is that people feel safe in their homes. And so we're really excited to welcome you today to talk about the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation. So this is Lisa Gibbs, and she is the executive director. So welcome.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit about the foundation.
Yeah, the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation is a 25-year-old foundation registered with the Canada Revenue Agency. Was started really grassroots in just what you said, that you know, safety and home is fundamental to who we are, and the issue of domestic violence obviously is a disruptor to that. And the powers that be that decided 25 years ago to start the Shelter Foundation had a really strong premise that really wrapped around the concept that business for good. So what that means is that you've got a business, of course, and we rely on businesses in this country, but Royal LePage decided that in fact, one aspect of their business was going to be for good. And the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation came as a result of that. And then the issue of domestic violence is just a whole other piece that I'd love to talk about too.
Absolutely. I personally was shocked. We had someone from the foundation that spoke to our office recently, specifically for some of the newer agents who might not have been aware of it. And there were several people within our office who were kind enough to speak about their own situation. Oh. And it really struck home to me how close that was, and to hear them personally, which I'm sure you have the opportunity to do, but to hear their stories and what they really survived through. And I don't know if it's appropriate, or obviously with confidentiality, whether you can maybe try to help our watchers understand like how personal this is, and some of the situations that the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation can help people through and out of.
Well, you know, the beauty of the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation is that it supports over 200 shelters across this country.
Amazing.
And the issue of domestic violence is so prevalent, and it's complex, and it's associated with shame and stigma and silence, and you know, to have that kind of a revelation or a personal discussion about what's happened is not common. But what we know is the issue of domestic violence is increasing. And we saw that through the pandemic, where our shelter partners were telling us that there was a 40% increase in those seeking shelter. And it's a complex issue. That shelters is but one tactic to deal with the issue of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and I've had so many people do just that. And it's a privilege in my role that people can share those types of stories with me, and it's shocking. The Canadian Women's Foundation tells us that 2/3 of Canadians know a woman who has been impacted by violence. That's how common it is. So for every woman that shares her story, and we're so blessed that she does, there are many women around that room who will not. And for lots of reasons, as I shared, the shame and the stigma surrounding domestic violence.
Fear too.
Absolutely. And what's really incredible is that it's not her issue, right? Like, this is something that has been given to her, and now she has to deal with it. And she has to oftentimes be in a position of protecting her children as well.
Absolutely.
So the shelters that we support also have programs that are specific to children, that are trauma-informed programming that work to, you know, not only help mom with her very different issues, but the children, and paramount to the trauma-informed programming that they're receiving is the efforts to break that cycle of violence. So, again, stats say that if a child sees violence at home, that they're more likely to be a perpetrator of violence. And so to stop that is another important aspect.
It is so good to know that in the shelters, it's not just providing a roof and meals and clothes, that it actually is education and counseling and
exactly the whole suite of dealing with the family that's presenting and where they are right now. So
the first time I was ever exposed to the Royal LePage Shelter was probably very early days, and it was and I was at a golf tournament, and I remember the speaker saying, just like you kind of said, 2/3 of people know somebody. He said, 1 in 4 people basically are impacted by domestic violence, and he literally said, like, look around the room, and you're not, it may be hard to believe, but every 4th person, one way or another, is either a perpetrator statistically or a victim of violence. And it just stuck with me. I thought 1 in 4, wow.
Yeah. And, you see people's opinions evolving. Or people's response to domestic violence. So 50 years ago this year, Canada's first shelter was opened here in Toronto, Interval House. And at that point, now get ready for this, they referred to the issue of domestic violence as runaway wives.
Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
I know, isn't that 50 years ago?
Yeah,
Not
not
really,
that long ago.
relatively speaking.
That's it.
And so again, you come back to 25 years ago, the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation was created on an issue that was very young. And there's also that, well, it's none of our business really what goes on behind closed doors. That's all a part of it. And I think the bold move of Royal LePage to start its Shelter Foundation was incredible.
And it's such a logical connection with what
It
we
is,
do every day.
Right. And I love to make note of this, but Royal LePage is the only real estate company in Canada with its own charitable entity. So again, that business for good.
Yeah. And, as a team and, as individuals, I know we all support a number of charities in various ways. What is really, I think, phenomenal about the Shelter Foundation is that every dollar raised goes to the program.
Thanks, Sarah. That is so
it's
true.
Huge. And is it 41 million?
Yes.
41 million raised in the 26 years.
Yes.
That's an astounding number.
Yeah, exactly. And, I don't want to berate that, charitable entity in Canada does such good work and they have to pay their costs too. But Royal LePage has done that for us. So, I think that it offers a very different value proposition to our supporters. It feels good that, the dollars that are raised in the methods that we can talk about, that goes right back to the community. And I think what's really important too, for our shelter partners, they tell us that working with Royal LePage is so positive because they don't have to deal with some of those administrative issues, or like receipting, or fundraising costs. That's borne on us, and so they get a check. And better than that, we don't designate where it goes. They designate where the funds.
So is that
are
basically
needed.
you identify individual shelters and or organizations, and then you basically help fund those shelters?
Well, really, it's Royal LePage agents who say, you know what, in my community, this is my shelter, and I want all of the funds that I raise to go 100% to that shelter. So it's not anything that we select. It's our Royal LePage agents who tell us where the dollars are to go.
And you do a great job too of making it easy for us to participate in the program. Maybe you can share with the people watching some of the ways that the funds are raised.
Yeah. 2 primary ways. The first is events, and they're fun, right? And you can, you talk about all the different ways, truly inspiring ways that Royal LePage agents raise funds. It's, they raffle off a old fur coat that at our last conference raised 20 grand.
I think one of our realtors here was the top.
It's just
manager.
it's incredible how this works. We're trekking to Ecuador in November. And
How many years has that been now?
this will be the 5th. So they do it every second year. And the fundraising minimum is $6,000. So it's a lot of money to raise.
And they do the trek.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they pay their way there.
Exactly. That's a really important part too. So again, there's that 100% flow through of funds. So again, events are big. One of the really cool ways that that funds are generated, and it's actually back to that business for good concept, is the commission donor program. And so agents sign up for that, and based on every sale, a set amount of money goes to the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation. And at the end of the year, those funds accumulated go out to the shelter that the agent has selected. So what we also want to do is tell customers that or clients that, because we've seen research that tells us that two things equal, and the one that's affiliated with a charity, that's the one that gets the business. And obviously the talent around this room for selling real estate, is massive. But it's just interesting that again, presented with two things that are exactly the same, if there's a charitable connection to it, that's the one that the client will choose. So,
for us, it makes so much sense to support this charity. It makes a lot of sense from the Royal LePage standpoint, and also just in the line of work that we're in homes. If our client isn't buying or selling real estate right now, how would they potentially get involved with supporting the shelter?
Yeah, great question. So there's lots of ways that we will reach out for fundraising, primarily through real estate or Royal LePage agents, because that's our group. But we're developing some really cool plans for a new event coming up in October.
Okay.
That will be just that. So it will be an opportunity for Royal LePage agents to invite their clients to this event that we're doing that will support our shelter partners in the community. So, but as it stands right now, online, rlp.ca/shelter can make a donation in honor of someone, in honor of a birthday. Of course, a charitable receipt is sent for that donation, and primarily that's the way that funds are received. Perhaps there's someone on of course there's 130 real estate agents who are participating in Trek, so they're fundraising from the public too, from friends and family and things. So,
And even beyond the foundation, volunteering at the shelters. I know as we've become more aware of the issue and the great work that's done, it I think will make some people really passionate about physically. It's not always the money donations, but their time and their care.
Yes, exactly. And on their boards, because each one of the shelters is an independent charity like Royal LePage Shelter Foundation, so they have their own board of directors as well. And for a Royal LePage agent to put their hand up to act as a board member is transformative, really, really important. So many different ways of engaging with your shelter partner, definitely.
And is there any kind of an average of how long people tend to stay in the shelters, or is it,
That's very topical right now, and particularly back to what I said about the increases in domestic violence cases. So there's two kinds of shelters: emergency shelters and second stage shelters. And emergency shelters are very well developed. Most communities will have one, but their stays are supposed to be 3 months, and then the family will move on. But that's not happening because of the cost of rentals right now. And so they're being stuck in that. So women and children oftentimes get turned away because of this issue. So there's been some energies around creating more second stage housing to accommodate a longer period of time, because the family has been traumatized. You can't get over that and on to
On a set schedule.
exactly.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't
Yes.
work that way.
Right.
So a lot of our shelter partners are working with the federal government and the provincial governments to create the second stage housing to deal with that. But it's very topical right now as an issue.
Well, you think if the intake went up by 40% in a 2-year period or whatever, just that backlog that would create. But maybe the only, well, there's never a good thing about that, but at least I think there was more public awareness during COVID a little bit. And, I think it was more topical as people were kind of trapped at home. And I remember hearing a news story of a woman who, her husband was he was a long distance trucker. So he tended to be away for long periods of time, but then in COVID, at least initially, it shut down. So all of a sudden, this abusive situation is there 24/7, and that was kind of the breaking point. And she had to go to a shelter to get help with their kids. But how terrifying! Terrifying! Like how do you even leave with your kids when the abuser's home?
Yeah,
So.
and you just took something that it's not always physical violence either. Coercive of control is a new word that really represents that whole gaslighting, that all of those different psychological abuse that comes about, and it really does change, how a woman reacts to a situation. She'll close in, she'll withdraw from family and friends, and her friends and family are probably confused because they don't see those classic physical characteristics, but it's just as or even more damaging, I've heard women talk about. So abuse happens in a lot of different ways. Another interesting point too is the connection between domestic violence and mass murders. And we wouldn't think about that ordinarily, but the most recent mass casualties report that came out of Port-au-Pic, Nova Scotia, in April 2021, when there was 22 murders, that was precipitated by a domestic incident with a murderer's partner. And the research has shown that a number of mass murders are exactly. So it's like it's the canary in the coal mine. And again, another reason that this is such a big issue.
And you think into that, and all of the terrible things that you can hopefully avoid by stopping that cycle.
Exactly. And so the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation supports shelters directly, but there's also funding that supports national violence prevention programming, which I think is really important to note. So you're dealing with the issue in the community, but the foundation also looks at that long game and how do you start to support?
Right, because that's really the root of it. If you can stop the violence at the outset versus it getting to the point where someone even needs the shelter, that would be so much better for families, for couples. Because I'm sure there's a lot of love in those houses where the domestic abuse can happen. It's
very
just
confusing, right?
Exactly. And if you can somehow figure out a way to salvage those families, salvage those relationships without it getting to that point, and get help for the abuser because they've probably been abused, it would be so great to just start it at a grassroots.
Yeah, and there's a lot of wonderful programs that are happening across the country that too are looking for funds. So Royal LePage Shelter Foundation is in a position to evaluate and support those as well. So.
And Lisa, is there a hotline? Like I know I've been on the site, and you can look up the for our clients if anyone needs help. My goodness, hopefully this message reaches them. But you can go and pick a shelter in your neighborhood. And do they just call into that shelter direct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sheltersafe.ca is the best. It's an organization that Royal LePage Shelter Foundation funded as a founding partner, and I call them the head office of the issue of domestic violence in Canada. And they have a map, just as you said, that a woman can locate the shelter closest to her. It will provide a telephone number, and it'll give her some information, preliminary, what the experience will be. Some women choose to leave. Some women choose to make a connection and talk about it and get it valid. So it's very individualized. Not every woman leaves. and goes to a shelter. And I think it's really important for a woman to know that she has many choices.
That's great before it gets to a point where she feels she has to go to a shelter. That's awesome.
Exactly,
Yeah. And what was that?
exactly.
What was that source again that you
Yeah,
said?
it's called sheltersafe.ca, and it's in both official languages. It is a wealth of information on the issue. And also, I think it's important to point out that it's not just for women who are facing this. It's for friends and family, because we'll see that and we'll be concerned for her. And so those individuals can reach out to sheltersafe.ca, and there's a section that's applicable to them as well as the caregiver.
And it's interesting, I mean, we would talk in terms of domestic violence and he versus she or whatever, but we know that domestic violence goes both ways as well. Are there any grassroots movements or whatever to give help to men that are being abused at home?
Yeah, there's a number of shelters who do support anyone escaping domestic violence. I think it's really important to note that it's like a 95% female to male rate, but it's not negating the fact that it does happen, and that the shelter system in Canada has support for those individuals as well.
Right, and that may be partly a shame thing too. Like that number might
yeah.
actually be bigger than 5%, but
Nobody's saying anything.
So true.
because if there's shame for women, it probably feels even,
That's right.
even
Yeah.
harder for a man to come through forward in some
So I
cases. but-
think it's also important for those who are listening to know that this is a great conversation about the issue of domestic violence in Canada, Royal LePage Canada, Shelter Foundation, and what it does. But I think, personally, I want the viewers to know that the people sitting around this room are also supporting their shelters through the Royal LePage Shelter Foundation. So, I mean, I'm not a real estate agent, but honestly, I think it's really cool to know that you do that. And I might be a bit biased, but all things considered, I would have to want to go with Royal LePage agents. I would want to go with the Mills team because of your support for Shelter Foundation. So on behalf of all those who can't, thank you so much for what you do and how you support.
Thank you for what you do, Lisa,
Yeah,
so much.
Absolutely.
Your
And
whole
I
team.
don't think we even talk to our clients probably enough about that. And so I think that if we do that more too, that's a great way to open up the conversation, because you never know really who you're speaking to. And it may be that they're interested in supporting, or they like that we support, or, maybe it's an opening that they can, if we have those websites and things, that it may just come up with people, and hopefully if they feel safe to approach us to ask for any of that
Right.
information.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Lisa.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
for coming
much.
and being with us and just sharing the message. So thank you so much.